Hey there folks, welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture, and today we're going to be talking about the sophomore album from Idols called Joy as an Act of Resistance. So when I reviewed Idols last year, I was a very different person. Specifically one who hadn't exactly developed an appreciation for hardcore punk. I mean, I had brushed against the genre over the years, but I wouldn't exactly qualify myself as having in-depth knowledge or even really much of a liking for the genre. And thus, it was all the more startling for me how well Idols' debut album Brutalism clicked. A howling, guttural grind that was also fiercely intelligent and a sort of political polemic that could hit like a ton of bricks. Both it and the song from it, 1049 Gotho, wound up on my year-end list for 2017. And I'd be lying if I said it didn't kickstart some deeper curiosity within me that contributed to me putting 80s hardcore punk as an option on Resonators. Of course, it's 8 months later, and with a much deeper knowledge base around hardcore punk and associated subgenres, I was anticipating this album all the more, but my expectations were even higher. The fast turnaround time was a little bit concerning, and it wasn't like Idols didn't have some problems on their debut, and while embracing a spirit of riotous optimism as Buzz was implying in the face of dark times, that's an attitude I can get behind. I wasn't really sure Idols was the act from which I wanted to hear that message and theme. My favorite cuts from Brutalism have been some of the darkest and wiriest and angriest, so this was looking to be quite the tonal shift for the album. But hey, it was either this or Eminem and Kamikaze, and I wanted to get started on a high note here, so alright, what the hell. What do we get out of Joy as an Act of Resistance? Well, honestly, it was exactly what I needed from Idols. The sort of frenetic but sharp as hell wallop that drilled deeper into the themes and arcs and ideas that characterized their debut album, and an emotive core that might not be as dark or edgy, but definitely is potent all the same. Hell, there's a very real possibility that it's better than Brutalism, or at the very least more consistent and accessible in its framing and ideas and subject matter once all the references are decoded, and it's fairly easy this time around. In other words, yeah, you gotta believe the critical hype on this one, folks. Joy as an Act of Resistance is gonna wind up among the best albums of 2018, and for damn good reason. It kicks ass! Now, if you're familiar with many of the tones that Idols brought to the table on Brutalism, you'll probably have some firm idea of what's driving their sound, because it hasn't changed that much beyond the details. Jagged bass lines, efficient drum work, roaring, noisy guitars, and the huge vocals of frontman Joe Talbot that split the difference between thickly accented guttural roars and an uncanny melodic sensibility when he needs to wrench a hook back into line. And yet, when you brought it all together with a sort of sharp but defiantly punk and almost lo-fi production, and made for a cacophonous, noisy wallop splitting the difference between hardcore punk with post-punk, more than once flying off the rails into compositions that could be as unpredictable as they were heavy. Now, of course, that did contribute to Brutalism winding up a little bit more uneven than it should be, even for a debut, especially in the slower passages that showed that Idols weren't exactly yet great balladeers, and the album kind of ended on a slow note. Well, if there's anything that the band was looking to quash this time around, it was this assumption. Starting from the rattling, grinding buildup of Colossus that would become all the more apparent on the Spacious Dirge of June, which not only showed Talbot embracing a more melodic singing voice, but also production that took a much grander scope and just sounded bigger in a lot of the guitar textures. And while I can see some as this sanding back some of the raw bass edge that was so fundamental to the grooves on Brutalism, the switch to featuring heavier layers of guitar with borderline tremolo riffing, it only served to punch up the manic catchiness of hooks for songs like I'm Scum and Television and Danny Nedelko. And I'm not going to complain about Joe Talbot showing off more convincing dramatic range. That's great for him as a performer. I'll come back to this, but when Talbot described this record as having some influences coming from Oi music, especially in the construction of the vocal layering on the hooks and some of the melody lines, really he's mining from the best possible elements, like the brighter jingles of percussion and the progressions riding against the still prominent rumbling bass lines like on Great and Danny Nedelko. Hell, when you compare these to the songs like Graham Rock and Rottweiler, very clearly earlier songs that could have easily been cuts from Brutalism with the slightly muddier, lo-fi mixing and more slapdash composition, the progression, it can't help but feel like a net positive for Idols. I like the direction they're going in, but it's also progression that was kinda needed for this content. And to get into that, let's circle back to the usage of the Oi subgenre to describe this album, because Joe Talbot himself framed it a little bit differently. He called it Snowflake Oi, and that qualifier puts Idols into interesting territory, shedding aside the skinhead and right-leaning connotations that unfortunately came to be associated with that subgenre after the original wave, for no less than a furious but layered deconstruction of modern toxic masculinity. Now, with Idols approaching the subject, deconstruction was going to be inevitable. There's always been a sneering veneer of guttural irony at the core of Idols' work, especially through Talbot's delivery, but where brutalism trended towards nihilism, joy as an act of resistance, it flips the script for something that's more optimistic, damn near upbeat at points as Joe Talbot parses through a mingled blur of frustration, confusion, and sadly grief. Emphasis on the last one because, as songs like June mention, his daughter was born stillborn shortly after the release of Brutalism last year, and along with the passing of his mother from a prolonged illness, the struggle to reconcile such heavy emotions with the ongoing conversation surrounding showing emotion and masculinity, it's a bit of a messy one, and one all the more courageous for Joe Talbot's choice to find some sort of a light at the end of the tunnel. He's gonna come out stronger and better for it. And you know what? The sheer juxtaposition could almost seem hilarious from the outside. Such a guttural presence roaring about the need for vulnerability, and men to embrace tolerant acceptances, become the colossi of passion and emotion in the face of distant father figures in larger society preaching an uncompromising and very narrow view of male emotion, even nowadays. But once again, Idols proves themselves smart enough to both embrace the wry humor of the situation on songs like Love Song and Glam Rock, but also put forward how such a nuanced openness might not just be necessary in coming years, but forward-thinking, or even welcome to deal with some deeper societal or personal emotional wounds, speaking loud and proud for the rights of immigrants on Danny Nedelko and Great, and then for queer folks on Colossus and Samaritans, and a really great cover of Solomon Burke's old song Cry to Me. And while Idols has always been immensely quotable, here they're more than willing to crib and interpolate from artists like Nancy Sinatra and even Katy Perry to drive home a point against those who would again prey upon that weakness in order to divide us instead of a raw emotive core in order to bring us all together, guys most of all. Neatly bookending the record from Rottweiler as screed to a demonizing tabloid to Never Fight a Man with a Perm, which takes a set of tortured, coked up funhouse mirrors of masculine projection and then after the bloody melee is able to just hug things out. How punk of them in the best way possible. You know what, folks? If you're looking for the right point to hop on board with Idols, Joy as an Act of Resistance is damn near the best one. More refined and catchy this time around, sure, but no less layered and insightful and furious. And it is furious, but funny and occasionally heartbreaking. This is the sort of punk rock with the brains and firepower to set a very powerful narrative. In a larger cultural war surrounding society and gender right now, this is a heavyweight contender. A snowflake oi that nevertheless can trigger an avalanche. A forward-thinking picture of what men can deliver in the modern age. That's nuanced, vibrant, human, and frequently hilarious. Again, I'll say it, one of the best records of 2018, netting a 9 out of 10, absolutely a recommendation. I find few things to criticize here. And if you are beset by those who would preach a very narrow or regressive view of what man can do or what we can be, you all know the type, especially on YouTube right now. This is the album to shove in their faces. Hell, for the most part, you'll be doing them a favor. Definitely check this out. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. Not really as much to say about this album this time, especially in comparison with Brutalism, which was very much my introduction to this band. There was a lot to deconstruct. Bit of an easier, more accessible album, but no less catchy, no less fun. I highly recommend this. You want to buy it? Links down in the description below. And I got the poll up there. I'm curious where you guys fall on this, because it is a slight change in sound, and I can see some people being a little reticent to get on board, especially those who are looking for more of that raw punk edge, which is still there, but it is a little catchier, for lack of better words. Anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, I'm all ears. And if you guys want to get involved in supporting this channel or help impact my schedule so I cover that Eminem album a little bit sooner, link to my Patreon is right over there, where 3 times a week you guys get to vote on my schedule, and once a week for the higher tier contributors, you guys get to add albums, movies, or even a top 10 list to that schedule. Hell, I just put out a top 10 list, the top 10 best hit songs of 1993. Definitely make sure to check that out. Beyond that, if you want to see my schedule, it's on my Instagram, link down there below. But till then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.